You know what's fascinating about human nature? We're all guilty of putting up appearances, like that perfectly curated social media feed that looks nothing like our real lives. And that's exactly what we're diving into today with an ancient story that feels surprisingly modern.
That's such an interesting parallel. The religious leaders Jesus confronted were essentially running the ancient equivalent of a carefully managed public image campaign, weren't they?
Exactly right. And Jesus calls them out in this dramatic way with the fig tree incident. Here's this tree looking absolutely perfect from a distance, but when you get close, nothing, no fruit at all.
Well, that must have been quite a scene when Jesus cursed that tree and it withered immediately. What strikes me is how he used this moment as a teaching opportunity.
You know what's really powerful about this? Jesus doesn't just stop at the fig tree demonstration. He follows it up with these three increasingly intense parables that basically put these religious leaders on notice.
Hmm, tell me more about how these parables build on each other. What's the progression you're seeing?
So it starts with this story of two sons, one who says no but later does the work, and another who says yes but never follows through. It's like Jesus is saying, look, your words and actions don't match up.
And then he really turns up the heat with that vineyard story, essentially predicting his own death at their hands. That's some serious foreshadowing.
Right. And what's fascinating is how he gets them to pronounce judgment on themselves. They're the ones who say the wicked tenants should be destroyed, not realizing they're describing their own fate.
Well, that's what makes Jesus such a masterful teacher. He doesn't just tell them they're wrong, he leads them to discover it themselves.
And then comes this wedding banquet parable, which, by the way, would have immediately reminded his audience of Isaiah's prophecies about God's feast for all peoples. He's connecting all these scriptural dots for them.
That's interesting. So, he's not just making up these stories out of nowhere, he's drawing on their own sacred texts to make his point.
Exactly. And here's what's really crucial: these weren't ignorant people he was talking to, these were highly educated religious scholars who spent their lives studying scripture. But their knowledge actually became a barrier because they wouldn't humble themselves.
So, it's almost like their expertise blinded them to the truth, standing right in front of them.
You know what's particularly tragic? They understood enough to recognize that Jesus was talking about them in these parables. Matthew actually tells us this explicitly. But instead of repenting, they just became more determined to arrest him.
That really shows how knowledge without humility can actually harden our hearts, doesn't it?
And here's where it gets relevant for today. We still struggle with the same issues. We might not be Pharisees, but we all face that temptation to put on a good religious show without allowing true transformation in our lives.
Well, that brings us back to your opening point about appearances versus reality. Whether it's social media or religious practice, the gap between what we show and who we are can be pretty wide.
And that's exactly why these teachings still resonate. Jesus isn't just calling out ancient religious leaders, he's addressing a fundamental human tendency to resist authentic transformation while maintaining a facade of righteousness.
So, what's the takeaway for us today? How do we avoid falling into the same trap?
Well, I think it comes down to this: are we willing to be honest about where we really are spiritually? Are we bearing genuine fruit, or are we just putting on a good show?